A few weeks ago, I was asked to be co-host on Matt Dillahunty's Hang Up show, his Wednesday show, and I was pleased to do that. And something came up that kind of sparked some recollection in my head and something I'd meant to cover on this channel or other channels. Anyway, let's just take a quick look at a couple seconds from me and Matt Dillahunty on the Hang Up on the line.
I was fortunate when I was in Canada. I happened to arrive in one of the towns on my tour on the very night when Sean was doing.
I was with you that night. It was you and I in Calgary.
Yes.
So a couple things. He's referring to Sean McDowell, who had come up earlier because a caller had been asking about martyrs and disciple martyrs, and I referenced Sean's work that maybe the caller's evidence for the martyrdoms wasn't as good as he thought it was. That's fine. So he's talking about Sean McDowell. Also, I'm come to notice about myself that I am a very interruptive person. I try not to interrupt. It's a thing about myself I know that I try not to do, but clearly Matt was on a roll on his story there. And I just wanted to jump in and say, hey, I was there too, because it was exciting for me, but I totally disrupted Matt's train of thought. So Matt, I apologize for doing that to you. And we'll talk a little bit the circumstances of what he's talking about in a moment. But I just want to say, I acknowledge, and it's going to get worse here before it gets better. I'm an interrupting cow, and I'm sorry.
I asked a question specifically, and of course, I was not necessarily expecting Sean to instantly recognize me, but of course he did.
So then Matt in that clip went on to talk about what he and Sean had talked about on stage, and that was specifically evidence that demands a verdict, the book that he wrote with his father, and their interactions about that question. But what that reminded me that I was there that night, and I also stood up and asked Sean McDowell a question. Now, we're talking about, I don't know exactly the date, but we're talking about roughly 2017. My channel was pretty new, a few months old. Matt had never been on my channel. Matt was in town for a convention, and so I was lucky enough to be part of the group from that convention that had dinner and was hanging out with Matt that night before the convention started. But we didn't know each other, really. In fact, when I interrupted Matt on the hang up there, he may not have even remembered that I was there, and that was part of the excitement. So I was fresh. No one knew my real name. No one had seen my face. I was purely a cartoon. And a few months into this, still what I would call, well, I'm still an angry atheist right now. I'm angry every minute of every day. So that's the whole thing. But I was less able to control some of my contempt. Anyway, all that to say, Matt reminded me of that night that we were together and where, for the very first time, I had an interaction with Sean McDowell. I've never actually told Sean about this. I've never let him know, even despite we've had interactions since, that this happened. It was a thing. But I happen to have a video of it. So we are going to travel back in time. Calgary, Alberta, anonymous Paul. No one knew that I was Paulogia. My channel was tiny. No one knew anything about me. It was a little heated. And I decided that I was going to ask. Oh, and by the way, this was in a church. So the setting was Sean McDowell and Bart Campolo were on stage having a discussion. It was a non-believer and believer discussion. This was happening in a church. In fact, it was happening in my former church. And it was supposed to be a very nice evening showing two people having a cordial conversation. Anyway, Hothead Paul gets Canadian angry and asks a question. Let's see how this goes.
Do you think someone can choose what they believe? Specifically, can they choose to believe something they're not convinced of? And if so, what advice would you have for someone like Bart and myself, who have read every book that's being sold back there, and there's still a gap between what we've learned and what we can accept as knowledge? And if we can't accept what we believe, or if we can't choose what we believe, what would you think about a God who created a brain like mine that requires a certain level of evidence, but yet has chosen not to provide that level of evidence?
So that's pretty cringe, right? So that's me very uncomfortable with being in public, a little bit nervous because this is actually my home church and the first time I'd stepped into that church as an outed atheist. So there were people in the congregation sitting there who kind of knew me. So there was a whole dynamic going on there. And also, I just didn't really know how to phrase questions well, know what some of the nuances of the answers were. But for some reason, I wanted to barge up there and confront Sean. I was Canadian angry. I think you can tell there. I was a little bit Canadian confrontational, at least in my head and in my heart now, recalling the incident, a little bit worked up. So Sean McDowell doesn't know who I am, never heard of Paulogia, would have never recognized me. He did recognize Matt, and that was a whole different dynamic. But now we get to see Sean dealing with just a random, as far as he knows, just a random person asking an aggressive question. How does Sean do?
So, in one sense, you're asking me a question. I don't know your story. I don't know where you come from. I don't know what books that you've read.
Which is true. He now actually has a better idea of me and my story and which books I've read, but great answer. He's not making assumptions. That's hats off, Sean. Well done.
So I would rather sit down, hear your story, have you unpack this and talk these things through and try to get to the heart of it. So I hesitate to kind of give a simple answer, given there's so much
I
background.
load you a lot.
Interrupting cow. Look at Paul, just not, this isn't going where I wanted it to go. Or I thought as I recall, I feel like I gave a bit of a sermon there in my question, and it was like sort of a 4-part question. And what I really wanted to know was, can you choose your own beliefs? So I did mean well. I just interrupt a lot. As you'll notice, my whole channel is based on watching videos and interrupting. So sorry, that's kind of what I do.
So
But I guess
do you think someone can choose what they
well,
believe?
so here's what I think. I think on some areas, yes. In the sense we can at least choose our actions. You can choose not to respond to a certain question. Sure. Okay. Other ones,
That's not a great intro. I think Sean's trying to formulate his thoughts, and that's fine. But choosing not to respond to something isn't really the same as not choosing your beliefs. I guess sticking your head in the sand in its own way is avoiding making a decision about something. But that's not the same as choosing what convinces you, right? If you're deliberately not looking for what will convince you, in a way, that's a tacit admission that if you heard the thing you were trying to avoid, you would be convinced otherwise. But that's nitpicking. Off we
a
go.
little more difficult. Can I just sit here and choose to believe Islam? Well, that's a little tougher. The main reason why is, yes, there are some sociological factors that I would have to work through. We've talked about that. But I really think it's false. So I can't talk myself into believing something that I actually think is false.
Which is a great admission. That's one of the things I do appreciate about Sean is that in some instances that he is willing to keep his claims modest. And yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. And I think if we're extrapolating this to Christianity, of course, because I'm not convinced Christianity is true, I can't just choose to believe it.
So I would have to read the books on it. I would have to talk to Muslims. I would have to be convinced that it were true to believe in it. So why you don't believe? I don't think God has made somebody with a certain brain to resist them from believing. I'm not persuaded that's the case.
Which wasn't exactly my question, though I acknowledge that because I phrased it in a complicated way, then stepped on myself to phrase it again, that maybe wasn't super clear. My question is, the spirit of my question is, can you choose what convinces you? But that's fine.
Your story, I have no idea, and I'm not going to pretend to weigh into it. But I certainly know a lot
Thank you. Appreciate that.
of people in my life who said the same thing to me and have had a conversion and a change for a variety of different reasons. So I think we have some indirect control over our beliefs by studying, by thinking about something. Pascal gave something that
That was why in my question I was trying to say, and I meant it. There was a big table of books for sale in the back, Evidence Demands a Verdict, and some other books that I had read a lot of them. It would be a lie to say I'd read every single one of them, but I had read a lot of the books that were apologetics books that were being sold in the back of the church that day. That was partly why I gave that background, is that I've been doing this homework. I've been trying to come along. So I don't think a Christian in good faith could say that I haven't been trying to absorb the information. Now, you might say that I'm resistant to the information while I'm absorbing it, but I clearly am making the effort.
wouldn't be good advice for you. But Pascal said if you
I'd like that he picked up on that. The Pascal's wager was probably not going to work for this angry Canadian at the microphone.
if you think something is kind of true, but you're not fully convinced by it, he actually said, do a devotional experience where you try to live like it's true and it's not inauthentic, but really start to ask yourself, if this worldview was true and I lived it out and I really prayed, is this a way of making it take, so to speak? And for some people, yes. Some people, no.
Sure, my story is very similar to Bart's. So in fact, his dad let.
So this is a bit of the Pascal wager, like fake it till you make it kind of thing. What can I get you to, hey, a used car salesman, what can I get to put you in Christianity today? Why don't you get into Christianity and drive it around and see if it works for you and see if it's a thing? I think I mentioned in the question, though, that I was a former Christian, and that may well be what he maybe meant when he said this isn't good advice for me. I definitely gave Christianity decades of my life to try it out. And in some ways it did work. And in some ways, but unfortunately, I'm not the kind of person who is looking for utility, right? I didn't reject Christianity because of the consequences on my life. I rejected it because I can't support it as being true. I care about whether it's true or not, and then we can talk about whether it has utility. So this whole get in and try Christianity and fake it till you make it kind of a thing, yeah, clearly bad advice for me. I think bad advice for everyone.
You need an altar
I'll,
call.
t-
so
I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
my
Oh, and then I interrupted again. I interrupted myself interrupting. So I am now in inception levels of interruption. I wanted to point out that Bart Campolo, who's the other gentleman on stage, if you don't know who Bart Campolo is, he's an amazing person. Go look him up. He is at least at the time, he was a secular chaplain at a university. He was the nation's first secular chaplain, I think, at a university campus type level situation. His father was Tony Campolo, a speaker, an evangelistic speaker who had great impact on me actually as a kid, because Tony Campolo came and spoke in our area a few times and big impact on me. And maybe we'll talk about that sometime. I also have a video on my channel about Father's Day, which is about a movie that interacts between Tony Campolo, the great evangelist, and his son, Bart Campolo, who loses his faith, and how that father and son interact with each other. That's one of the most important personal videos to me that I've ever made. So you can go check that out if you need more with Campolos. Anyway, I was not expecting Bart to chime in. Almost all the questions, as you can imagine, this was happening in a church setting. Even though Matt and I were there, most of the questions were from Christians to this atheist, Bart Campolo. So I wasn't expecting Bart to chime in. But Bart gave an amazing answer, and it's a much more eloquent way of phrasing what I tried to stumble through earlier on our TikTok videos. Let's hear what the atheist had to say.
my
Yeah.
Aunt Rose would say to you.
Okay.
My Aunt Rose, who prays for me every night, and what she would say is, I'm not going to try to talk to you anymore about faith, Bart. You've read all those books. I know you lived as a Christian for 30 years. I know you know that. She said, I'm going to pray because the Bible teaches that we are saved by grace through faith, and this not of yourself, lest any man should boast. It is a gift of God. Faith that we use to believe in God is a gift of God. Otherwise, it would be a work, right? So in a sense, God enables us to believe in him, she says. And therefore, what I always say to my Christian friends who want to dispute with me about Christianity is, I go, you shouldn't be talking to me. Like if you want me to come back to Jesus, pray that God would give me faith. And I don't mean it sarcastically. When a Christian tells me that they're praying for me, when they tell me that they think that I remind them of Jesus, or that we're all made in the image of God and that's why I'm a good person, like some people take that as patronizing. In their language, that is the nicest thing that they can say. That is as much as saying, I love you. And I take it as such.
Thanks for a great
I
conversation.
think
So my emotions at the time went from my heated wanted to get Sean to admit a gotcha type thing to Bart gave this answer. And that has actually this answer has shaped a lot of my attitude toward Christians for all the years since, for the 5 years or so since, that when a Christian says that they're praying for me, when a Christian says they want me to be saved, in their Christian language, in their Christian vernacular, in their Christian perspective, that is loving, that is not attacking, if they're saying it with sincerity, and that I should not stomp on the genuine Christian who wants to do that. Couple of things here. I mean, that if I stomp on them about it, that's just going to create a whole level of hostility and close down conversations later. It's not conducive to having a relationship with that person. Second of all, if I'm honest and sincere, that I am actually on a truth quest here, and if Christianity was true, I would want to know it. If I'm genuine in wanting to know that, and the way that I can come to know that Christianity is true is through someone else praying that the Holy Spirit will intervene, why would I want to stop that person from doing the thing that actually would show me that this is true? That is a disingenuous thing, I feel like. Now, I may think they're wasting time and all that kind of stuff. There might be more nuance around it that I'm not considering, but as a general principle, if someone wants to pray for me, that I would have my eyes open to the truth. That's great, because the truth is, I have nothing to fear from the truth, nor should a Christian. So that's great. And Bart, again, can tell why he's a chaplain, why he's considered, as he said in his thing, why some people consider him to be more Christian than Christians. He just has a very gentle spirit about him, and I thank Bart for that teaching that you gave me that night, and I've always appreciated it. Anyway, it didn't quite end there. It would have been nice if this had been where it ended, but it didn't.
That's a powerful thing to do. Interestingly, Calvin interpreted the verse, Ephesians 2:8-9, as the gift was grace, not the faith. Even Calvin interpreted it that way, ironically enough. But we just might differ on that one.
So it had been, Sean gave me what I thought was a good answer because I came in hot and Sean diffused it, didn't make it about me, didn't try and accuse me of anything, talked about generalities, and avoided also, for the Christians in the audience, falling into any kind of trap. And then Bart gave an even better answer that was of the heart, and Sean should have just affirmed it. He should have just said, you know what? That is exactly right. If you are a Christian and you have a friend who doesn't seem like the evidence for Christianity can sway them, you should be praying for that person. They should have. No, then he ruined it all by stomping on it with a very unimportant nuance about a Calvinist interpretation of a verse that the atheist just used to tell the other atheist in the audience that his question was a bit unfair and how he should treat fellow Christians. So rats. Bad ending, didn't quite stick the landing, but that is a flashback down memory lane to a night where I was in my former church. I had met Matt Dillahunty that night, and I had a chance to interact with Sean McDowell, a former hero, now potential enemy. Anyway, I've since had conversations with Sean, including famously an actually quasi-debate on Unbelievable, and we kind of know each other a bit now and interact. So that was when Sean and I met. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you. What did you think? Was that good advice? Bad advice? Did I handle myself? I handled myself poorly, I think. I hope I'm getting better. I do interrupt, and I'm sorry about that.